The arrogant millionaire left his pregnant wife. 2 years later, his boss is her new husband. A millionaire once told his pregnant wife that family would slow him down. 6 years later, he walked into a New York company asking for work and discovered that the woman he abandoned was now an executive. Her son had been legally adopted by another man, and neither of them needed his downfall to feel complete. Stay until the end, because this story does not reward revenge. It asks a harder question. Can a man become better after the people he hurt have every right to move on without him? If stories about dignity, responsibility, and true second chances speak to you, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Our story begins on the night Mason Caldwell mistook ambition for courage. Manhattan glittered beyond the windows of the Caldwell townhouse as Claire Whitmore arranged 2 plates on the dining table. She was 8 months pregnant, tired from a prenatal appointment Mason had promised to attend, and still determined to protect the hope that marriage could survive a difficult season. Their 5th anniversary had arrived during the most important quarter in Caldwell Enterprises history. Mason's logistics company was negotiating an expansion that could place distribution centers across 3 states. Investors praised his discipline. Business magazines praised his appetite for risk. Claire remembered when those same qualities had meant working together at a folding table in Queens, eating takeout, and dreaming of a stable home. At 9:40, Mason entered carrying a slim envelope from a law firm. Claire looked behind him. No flowers. We need to discuss something. Her eyes moved to the envelope. You missed the appointment. I know. The doctor says the baby is healthy. He moved when she played his heartbeat. Mason set the envelope on the table. I filed for divorce. The room became completely still. Claire did not open the envelope. You filed today? My lawyer commenced the action. You will be served with the summons and complaint. There are also notices concerning the automatic financial orders and health coverage. The legal language made the cruelty feel rehearsed. Why? Mason walked to the window. The expansion requires everything I have. Investors are questioning whether I can manage new family responsibilities while leading the company. You are divorcing me because strangers think fatherhood might reduce your productivity? I am protecting the future. Claire placed one hand over her stomach. Whose future? Mason offered a proposed agreement. It included temporary maintenance, continued insurance, a rental apartment, and future support for the child. He spoke as if generosity could transform abandonment into planning. Claire called an attorney before signing anything. The lawyer explained that New York divorce required formal filings, service, financial disclosure, and a judgment. Property, maintenance, child support, and parenting issues could not be resolved by Mason placing a private agreement on the table and ordering her to leave. Automatic orders restricted certain financial changes after the case began. If urgent support or housing protection was needed, her attorney could seek temporary relief. Claire remained in the townhouse for 10 days while counsel negotiated. She then moved to an apartment she selected near the hospital. The move was voluntary and documented, not an eviction disguised as marital authority. Mason continued paying the agreed expenses while the court process proceeded. At a preliminary conference, both sides submitted financial information. The judge asked Mason whether he understood that the child's right to support and safe parenting arrangements would be addressed independently from his business preferences. Yes, Mason said. Claire watched him answer the court more respectfully than he had answered her. Noah Whitmore Caldwell was born 5 weeks later after an emergency cesarean delivery. The hospital evaluated and stabilized Claire when she arrived in labor. Payment questions did not delay emergency treatment. Because Claire and Mason were still married, the hospital and attorneys handled parentage and birth records according to applicable law. Claire could not erase a legal father merely by leaving a line blank, and she did not try. Mason was notified. He arrived the following afternoon, stood beside the nursery window for 12 minutes, and asked whether Claire needed anything purchased. She needs you to decide whether you plan to know him, Claire's attorney said later. Mason requested a limited parenting schedule in the divorce papers, then canceled most of the early visits. He sent gifts selected by assistants and support payments processed through formal channels. When Noah was 9 months old, Mason moved an important meeting rather than attend a scheduled visit. Claire stopped adjusting the child's routine around promises Mason did not keep. The divorce judgment was entered after the parties resolved property, maintenance, child support, medical support, and parenting provisions. Mason retained legal rights and a path to contact. The order did not prevent fatherhood. His choices did. The first months after Noah's birth forced Claire to separate legal protection from emotional hope. Mason's support arrived on schedule, but his attention did not. He asked his assistant to request photographs, then failed to respond when Claire's attorney proposed specific visit dates. Every cancellation had a reason that sounded urgent: a lender dinner, a warehouse opening, a flight delay, an investor call. At one case conference, the judge reviewed the missed visits and asked whether Mason wanted parenting time in practice or merely on paper. "I want flexibility," Mason said. "Children require predictability," the judge answered. Flexibility cannot mean everyone else waiting to learn whether you will appear. The parenting arrangement was modified so that Mason had to confirm visits in advance. Repeated failures would prevent Claire from being forced to rearrange childcare and medical appointments. The order did not punish him. It protected Noah's routine. Claire kept a calendar on the refrigerator. Blue circles marked doctor visits. Green marks showed childcare shifts. Red marks recorded legal deadlines. For a while, she hated the calendar because every square seemed controlled by something difficult. Then she began adding yellow stars for small victories. Noah slept 4 hours. Claire passed an exam. Rent was paid. The pediatrician said his weight was improving. Mrs. Green, an older tenant downstairs, watched Noah when Claire had class. She had raised 3 children while working as a city clerk and refused to let Claire apologize for needing help. "Independence is not doing everything alone," she said. "It is knowing the difference between support and control." That sentence stayed with Claire. Mason had called his money support while using it to justify absence. Mrs. Green offered 2 hours of childcare and expected nothing except that Claire someday help another exhausted parent. Claire eventually did. She created a weekend study circle for working mothers in her finance program. They traded childcare, reviewed assignments, and practiced interviews. Years later, when Claire held an executive title, 2 women from that group managed departments inside Sterling Holdings. Their success was not a gift from Claire. It was the result of a network built when none of them could afford to waste another person's strength. Claire's first 2 years as a single mother were not a montage of effortless triumph. She worked remotely for an accounting service, slept in fragments, and learned to carry groceries up 4 flights while keeping Noah from dropping his toy train through the railing. She used child support for rent, childcare, and medical expenses without pretending it represented affection. At night, she studied corporate finance through a continuing education program. Before marriage, she had managed contracts for a shipping cooperative. During Mason's early business years, she had analyzed routes, negotiated warehouse leases, and built vendor spreadsheets without receiving equity or a title. Divorce revealed how easily informal contribution could disappear from a resume. She decided her next achievements would be documented. Sterling Holdings announced a public strategy competition seeking proposals for modernizing regional supply chains without eliminating thousands of jobs. Claire submitted an analysis arguing that automation should be phased alongside retraining, local supplier investment, and independent safety metrics. Most entries focused on immediate cost reductions. Claire calculated the long-term price of employee turnover, political opposition, service failures, and community distrust. Alexander Sterling read the proposal during a late-night review. He did not know Claire was divorced, pregnant recently, or connected to Mason Caldwell. The scoring process concealed personal information until finalists were selected. At the interview, Alexander asked, "Why did you treat workforce stability as a financial asset?" "Because it is one," Claire answered. "A company can remove experienced people from a spreadsheet in 1 quarter. It cannot replace their knowledge at the same speed." Sterling Holdings offered her a role as a strategy associate. The position came with training, health insurance, and access to a contracted childcare center. Claire accepted after reviewing the offer with an attorney. She had learned that gratitude should never replace due diligence. Her progress was steady. She created a supplier risk map that prevented a major disruption. She redesigned a warehouse integration plan after discovering that the original schedule ignored local permitting. When senior managers dismissed employee concerns, Claire translated those concerns into measurable operational risk. Alexander noticed her work, but company policy kept his admiration from becoming unchecked power. Claire reported through the chief strategy officer. Promotions required written criteria and committee approval. When she became a director 3 years later, Alexander did not vote. Their personal relationship began after years of professional contact. Alexander invited her to a museum fundraiser where Sterling Holdings sponsored a workforce education program. Claire agreed only after confirming that the ethics committee had no objection and that he would remain removed from her compensation decisions. Noah liked Alexander because he listened. At 4 years old, the boy asked questions without pausing for answers. Why did elevators know where to stop? Why did grown-ups drink coffee if it tasted bad? Could a warehouse be a house for werewolves? Alexander answered what he knew and admitted what he did not. Mason, meanwhile, saw his son only through annual photographs Claire's attorney provided under the parenting agreement after repeated cancellations made direct visits inappropriate. Shame became another excuse for absence. He told himself that Noah was too young, that a future meeting would be easier, that business would stabilize soon. When Noah was 3, Alexander and Claire became engaged. They did not assume marriage would make Alexander Noah's legal father. Their attorneys explained the step-parent adoption process and the significance of Mason's existing rights. Claire did not threaten Mason. Through counsel, she asked whether he intended to resume meaningful parenting under a structured plan or would consider consenting to adoption by the man raising Noah daily. Mason met with an independent attorney. He understood that consent would permanently change his legal relationship to the child. At the time, his company was expanding and he remained convinced that distance was a form of honesty. Alexander can give him stability, Mason said. Your consent is not a temporary delegation, the attorney warned. You should not sign because the conversation is uncomfortable. Mason waited 30 days, then signed the formal consent. A judge reviewed the adoption petition after Claire and Alexander married. The court considered the required documents and the child's welfare. When the order was entered, Alexander became Noah's legal parent with the rights and responsibilities that followed. The adoption was not created by a wedding, a nickname, or wealth. It became final through judicial approval. The adoption hearing was deliberately quiet. Claire and Alexander did not invite reporters or company leaders. Noah wore a small gray suit and carried a toy truck into the courtroom. The judge asked Alexander whether he understood that adoption created permanent legal responsibilities for support, care, inheritance, and decision-making. I understand, Alexander said. The judge asked Claire whether she believed the adoption served Noah's interests rather than her desire to close a painful chapter. Yes, she answered. Alexander has been present for the ordinary responsibilities. This order will give Noah legal stability if I become ill or die. It is about his security, not my anger. The judge reviewed Mason's consent, the investigation, and the family records. Noah was too young to provide the formal consent required of an older child, but the judge still spoke to him gently. What do you like to do with Alexander? Build trains, Noah said. He reads the directions. I improve them. Alexander whispered. That means he ignores them. The judge smiled and signed the order. Outside the courthouse, Claire experienced grief beside relief. The adoption protected Noah, but it also confirmed in law that Mason had chosen absence. Alexander did not tell her to focus only on happiness. You can feel both, he said. That was another difference between him and Mason. Alexander did not treat emotion as an obstacle to an efficient conclusion. He understood that some correct decisions still carry sorrow. Mason received notice that the adoption was final. He placed the document in the same drawer as the unopened anniversary card Claire had once given him. For several years he avoided looking at either. Consent had seemed responsible when he signed it. Only later did he understand that responsibility would have required showing up before another man needed to ask the court for permanence. Noah already called Alexander Dad. After the hearing, he asked whether the judge had made them extra official. Alexander smiled. The judge made the law recognize what I promised to do. What do you promise? To keep showing up. Claire and Alexander married in a small ceremony at a public garden. Noah carried the rings and whispered every line of the vows half a second after the adults said them. Claire did not feel rescued. She felt accompanied. For years after joining Sterling Holdings, she became executive vice president for responsible growth. Her record included profitable expansions, lower employee turnover, and a supplier program that created hundreds of small business contracts. Claire's most difficult professional assignment involved the proposed closure of a distribution center in upstate New York. The financial model favored shutting it down and moving the work. She spoke with engineers, drivers, local suppliers, and a maintenance supervisor who explained that the old center handled emergency rerouting during winter storms. The model treated that function as unused capacity because it was not needed every quarter. Back in Manhattan, Claire challenged the closure. A senior executive accused her of becoming emotionally attached to the workforce. "I am attached to complete information," she replied. The model assigns no value to resilience because resilience looks inefficient on ordinary days. She proposed a hybrid plan, modernize part of the existing site, retrain workers, and use the new automated facility for high-volume routes. The plan cost more initially, but protected emergency capacity and reduced the political and operational risk of a complete shutdown. The board approved a pilot. 2 winters later, a major storm closed the newer facility for 3 days. The upstate center kept medical and food shipments moving across the region. Claire's decision saved more than jobs. It preserved a system the spreadsheet had failed to understand. Alexander congratulated her after the crisis. "You were right," he said. "The maintenance supervisor was right," Claire answered. "I only made the board." The process took months. Claire accepted the scrutiny. "I spent too many years watching power avoid documentation," she told the committee. Mason's company followed the opposite path. He financed expansion with too much debt, ignored safety complaints at a distribution center, and treated every warning as an attempt to slow him down. A serious warehouse accident injured several employees. Investigators found maintenance failures and inadequate oversight. The company paid civil penalties and settlements. Mason was not personally convicted of a crime, but the board concluded that his leadership had created unacceptable risk. Customers left. Lenders withdrew. The board removed him as chief executive and restructured the company. Mason sold property to satisfy personal guarantees and contributed to a settlement fund for affected employees. The warehouse accident changed Mason before the bankruptcy did. A conveyor system had been scheduled for replacement, but production targets encouraged local managers to postpone downtime. Maintenance employees submitted warnings. Regional leaders softened the language before reports reached headquarters because they knew Mason reacted badly to delays. When the system failed, 2 workers suffered serious injuries. Mason visited the hospital expecting to offer financial assistance and receive restrained gratitude. Instead, the wife of one injured employee refused to shake his hand. "My husband told your managers that machine was dangerous," she said. "Do not stand here and call this an accident as though no one saw it coming." Mason left without. He had never ordered anyone to conceal the warnings. He had created a culture where people knew which facts were welcome. During settlement negotiations, his lawyers advised him to avoid statements that could increase liability. It did not erase the harm, and the families were not asked to praise him. Some rejected meetings. Others accepted the assistance while remaining angry. Mason learned that compensation could be necessary without becoming absolution. At Northline, the outside compliance advisor required him to review the accident as part of probation. Mason presented the case to a room of managers without hiding his role. "The failure was not only mechanical," he said. "It was informational. Every level of the company learned to improve the message before sending it upward. I created that pressure." A manager asked whether leaders could realistically invite every objection without losing speed. "No," Mason answered. "But we can decide which risks are too important to be filtered through fear. Safety is one of them." The presentation became part of Northline's leadership training. Mason received no bonus for it. The value lay in preventing someone else from repeating a lesson workers had paid to teach him. For the first time, he could not describe failure as bad timing. People had warned him. He had chosen not to listen. 6 years after leaving Claire, Mason applied for a director position at Northline Logistics, a Sterling Holdings subsidiary. He knew the parent company, but did not know Claire's exact role. A search firm screened him, reviewed the litigation history, and advanced him because he had genuine operational experience despite serious concerns. Claire learned his name only when the conflict check system flagged their prior marriage. She immediately disclosed the relationship and recused herself from all review. Alexander also recused himself as Claire's husband and Noah's adoptive father. The subsidiary's independent directors, human resources leader, an outside compliance advisor controlled the process. Mason arrived at Sterling headquarters believing the final interview would determine whether his career could begin again. In the executive lobby, he saw Claire walking from a board meeting beside Alexander. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a tablet. There was no dramatic transformation created by luxury. The difference was authority. She had become a person whose decisions affected thousands of employees, and she did not need Mason to witness it. Their eyes met. "Mason," she said. "Claire." Alexander remained quiet, allowing her to choose the boundary. "I have recused myself from your application," Claire said. "Alexander has as well. The subsidiary committee will make the decision." Mason nodded. "I understand." A child's voice echoed from the adjoining family room. "Dad, did you bring my science board?" Noah ran toward Alexander carrying a model bridge. He was nearly 6, with Claire's dark eyes and Mason's serious expression when concentrating. Alexander lifted the project carefully. "The bridge survived the elevator," he said. Noah noticed Mason. "Who is that?" Claire answered with age-appropriate truth. "That is Mason Caldwell. He is someone from an earlier part of our family history, and he is here for a business meeting." Noah accepted the explanation because children follow the emotional safety provided by adults. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell." Mason managed to reply, "Hello, Noah." The boy took Alexander's hand and continued explaining the bridge. Mason watched them leave and felt the permanent meaning of the adoption consent he had signed 3 years earlier. The interview committee did not ask about Claire or Noah. They questioned Mason about safety oversight, debt, employee injuries, and the culture that allowed managers to hide maintenance failures. "I created incentives that rewarded silence," Mason admitted. "People learned that bringing me bad news damaged their careers." "What would you do differently?" the compliance advisor asked. "Separate safety authority from production targets. Protect internal reporting. Tie executive compensation to verified maintenance and employee outcomes, not only volume." The committee did not hire him as director. His recent history made the senior role inappropriate. Instead, after extensive reference checks, they offered a lower position as a project manager on a 12-month probation, with no reporting line to Claire or Alexander and strict compliance oversight. The offer surprised Mason. "Why give me any position?" he asked the committee chair. "Because accountability is not the same as permanent exclusion," she said. "But this is not a restoration of your old status. It is a chance to demonstrate behavior at a level where the risk can be controlled." Mason accepted. His first months were humiliating in ways wealth had never prepared him for. He attended training led by people younger than him. Every decision required review. Former competitors saw his name beneath a project manager title and whispered. Mason wanted to explain that he had once led a national company. He gradually understood that the explanation was irrelevant. The lower position changed Mason's daily life. He no longer had an assistant protecting his calendar. He booked his own travel, completed expense reports, and waited for approvals from people who once would have waited outside his office. At first, he interpreted every procedure as evidence that the company did not trust him. Then his supervisor, Denise Cole, explained the point. "Controls are not personal insults," she said. "They protect good people from bad pressure and bad people from unchecked opportunity. You spent years inside a company where your confidence replaced controls. That will not happen here." Mason respected Denise because she never humiliated him and never allowed charm to bypass a rule. When he delivered strong work, she said so. When he tried to move too quickly, she returned the plan with questions. During a vendor selection, Mason recognized an old associate who offered unusually favorable pricing. The associate hinted that future consulting work could be available once Mason regained influence. Years earlier, Mason would have treated the conversation as networking. This time he documented the contact, disclosed the relationship, and removed himself from the selection. The vendor did not win. The compliance team later found undisclosed financial problems. Denise added the incident to his probation review. "This is what change looks like in an organization," she said. "Not feeling sorry. Creating a record that protects other people from your temptation." Mason kept those words. Remorse had occupied his thoughts for years, but remorse was private. Ethical conduct had to become observable. At the end of probation, the committee extended his employment, but not his authority. Mason felt disappointed, then recognized the decision as reasonable. Trust had been damaged over years. Expecting full restoration after 12 months would have repeated the entitlement he claimed to be leaving behind. During a warehouse renovation, an engineer reported that management's preferred schedule could compromise fire suppression testing. The delay would cost money and embarrass the team. The old Mason would have pressured the engineer to approve a workaround. The new Mason stopped the schedule and documented the concern. The project finished 3 weeks late and passed inspection. No article praised the decision. That was precisely why it mattered. Claire observed his work only through ordinary executive reporting. She did not mentor him, protect him, or sabotage him. Their contact remained professional and rare. After 6 months, Mason requested a private conversation through the company's human resources office. Claire agreed to meet with an HR representative present. "I owe you an apology," he said. Claire waited. "I treated your pregnancy as a threat to my freedom. I treated support payments as proof that I had fulfilled responsibility. Then I consented to Noah's adoption because I told myself another man could do the work better. The truth is that I was afraid to do the work at all." Claire's expression remained calm. "The adoption gave Noah stability. I do not regret it." "Neither do I," Mason said, and the words surprised him with their truth. "I regret that my failures made it necessary." He did not ask to meet Noah. He understood that the adoption had permanently changed his legal role and that disrupting the child to relieve adult guilt would be another form of selfishness. "I hope he knows he was never the reason I left," Mason said. "He knows adults made decisions before he could understand them. When he is older, we will answer his questions honestly." Mason placed a sealed letter on the table. "Would you preserve this for him? No request. No pressure. Only the truth, if you and Alexander believe he should have it someday." Claire did not promise that Noah would read it. She agreed to place it with the family records. The letter said, "You did not lose me because you were difficult to love. I lost the right to raise you because I repeatedly chose ambition, fear, and pride over presence. Alexander is your father-in-law and in life. I will not ask you to reduce that truth to comfort me. I only hope you build your future knowing that my absence was never your fault." Mason completed probation and remained at Northline. He never regained an executive suite. He became known for asking quiet employees to speak first in safety meetings. He created a maintenance escalation process and insisted that unresolved hazards appear in reports sent directly to independent oversight. He also joined a restitution committee supporting workers injured during the collapse of Caldwell Enterprises. His financial contribution was smaller than the settlement fund, but his time was consistent. He listened to families describe consequences he once reduced to line items. One injured worker asked, "Do you expect us to forgive you?" "No," Mason answered. "I expect myself to stop hiding from what happened." Years passed. Claire led Sterling Holdings through expansions that balanced profit with workforce commitments. Alexander remained proud of her without presenting himself as the source of her success. Noah grew into a child who loved bridges, astronomy, and correcting adults when they confused facts with guesses. On Noah's 10th birthday, he asked Claire why his last name had changed when he was little. Claire and Alexander answered together. They explained the divorce, Mason's absence, the legal adoption, and the preserved records. They did not call Mason a monster or a misunderstood victim. "Can I read his letter?" Noah asked. Claire asked whether he wanted to speak with a counselor first. Noah agreed. Weeks later, he read the letter at home with both parents nearby. He cried, became angry, and asked questions no adult could answer perfectly. Alexander did not fear being replaced. Claire did not defend decisions that caused pain. They told Noah he could decide later whether he wanted any information or contact permitted by law and appropriate guidance. For the moment, Noah placed the letter back in the box. "I already have a dad," he said. Alexander hugged him. "You do, and you are allowed to have questions about every part of your story." Mason never knew exactly when Noah read the letter. He had finally learned that an apology does not entitle the person giving it to witness its effect. At Northline, Mason eventually became senior project manager, not because Claire arranged it, but because 7 years of documented work showed a different pattern. The title was lower than the one he once considered his minimum. The man holding it was better than the chief executive he had been. The most painful moment of Mason's life was not seeing Claire beside Alexander or hearing Noah call another man dad. It was understanding that they had built a lawful, loving, stable family without needing his destruction as the foundation. Claire's healing did not require his suffering. Noah's security did not require a dramatic confrontation. Alexander's fatherhood did not depend on defeating a biological parent. Each of them moved forward by respecting boundaries, legal responsibilities, and the child's needs. Mason's second chance was therefore not a return. He did not recover the marriage, undo the adoption, or reclaim a place in photographs. His second chance was the opportunity to become honest where he once manipulated, cautious where he once gambled with other people's safety, and useful without demanding admiration. That is the difference between redemption and reward. A reward restores something to the person who wants it. Redemption changes the person even when nothing is returned. One autumn evening, Mason stayed late at a Northline warehouse reviewing a safety report. A young supervisor apologized for delaying the project. "You did not delay it," Mason said. "You prevented us from pretending the risk was acceptable." Outside, trucks moved beneath the lights in orderly lines. Years earlier, Mason would have seen only volume, contracts, and growth. Now he saw drivers expected home, mechanics trusting equipment, and families depending on leaders they would never meet. He closed the report and approved the repair. Across the city, Claire, Alexander, and Noah ate dinner in an apartment filled with the ordinary noise of family. Noah argued that the bridge on his school project could support more weight. Alexander asked for evidence. Claire laughed because both of them had turned dinner into a committee hearing. No one mentioned Mason. That silence was not cruelty. It was life continuing. The empire Mason once protected had disappeared. The family he abandoned belonged to its own future. Yet the man who caused the damage had not been sentenced to remain unchanged. He learned that remorse becomes meaningful only when it stops demanding access, sympathy, or applause. Some doors close permanently. Maturity is not standing outside forever, insisting you deserve another key. It is accepting why the door closed, protecting the people behind it from further harm, and building a different life with the truth you finally learned. Long after the headlines about Caldwell Enterprises disappeared, Mason visited the old neighborhood in Queens where he and Claire had once rented a one-bedroom apartment. The laundromat had become a grocery store, the diner had new owners, and the building's front steps looked smaller than he remembered. He stood across the street thinking about the young couple who had lived there. They had possessed little money, but Claire had believed his promises because he still understood that dreams were meant to include another person. Success had not created his selfishness. It had given that selfishness better vocabulary, discipline, sacrifice, focus, leadership. Mason did not contact Claire after the visit. The memory was his responsibility, not a reason to disturb her peace. He returned to Northline and approved paid training for warehouse employees who wanted maintenance certifications. The program reduced vacancies and gave experienced workers a path into safer, better-paid roles. When Denise asked why he supported the cost, Mason said, "Because people should not have to disappear for a company to call itself efficient." That sentence would once have sounded weak to him. Now it sounded accurate. Claire's life also remained imperfect. Executive decisions drew criticism. Noah sometimes resented the privacy surrounding his adoption. Alexander and Claire argued about work, parenting, and whose turn it was to attend school meetings. Their family was not valuable because it avoided difficulty. It was valuable because no one used difficulty as permission to abandon the others. That was the world Mason had once been invited to build. Losing it became his consequence. Learning from it became his choice. And unlike wealth, that choice had to be made again every day.